I wasn't sure which maamer to be able to learn, but then I was learning a maamer for my birthday, Parsha Shlach. It's a Shlach maamer Tavshin Yud Gimel, and although it's not a groundbreaking maamer, but it has a lot of very, very important points, and I think a lot of things which tie into the Rebbe's look and teachings of the Rebbe throughout the years in the maamer. So the maamer begins on the words Vayihuyu Bnei Yisrael b'midbar vayimtzeu ish mekoshesh eitzim b'yom haShabbos. Like we read in last week's parsha, that there was a man, the Jewish people, when they were in the desert, they found a man gathering wood on Shabbos. And of course, he was taken and he was incarcerated until they found out exactly what to do with him, and eventually he was executed. Now the Zohar brings a perush that what was this mekoshesh eitzim? What was this wood gatherer? Eitzim is not just wood, but eitzim means trees. And one of the perushim in the Zohar is that this man, he wasn't gathering trees, rather he was comparing trees. What is comparing? The word mekoshesh, to gather, also is connected to the word hekesh, to compare or connect two things. Like we have in the Gemara, often makes a hekesh. So he was comparing trees. What trees was he comparing? It says the Zohar that he was comparing and contrasting the Eitz HaChaim, the tree of life, and the Eitz HaNas, the tree of knowledge, to see which one of them was greater. And then the Zohar brings the second parish, which is the simple parish, that he was simply gathering wood on Shabbos. He was Mechalel Shabbos, and he received his punishment. So the maamer, the Rebbe asks, first of all, what does this mean that he was comparing the Eitz HaChaim and Eitz HaDas? What sort of comparison was he making? What was the purpose of that? And number two, we know that all Perushim in a Pasuk, this was the Rebbe's Shita, that all Perushim in a Pasuk are connected. What's the connection between comparing the Eitz HaChaim and Eitz HaDas, which seems to be a very philosophical thing, to being Mechalel Shabbos? And to explain this, the Rebbe first goes and wants us to understand what is exactly the Eitz HaDas. Because in the Targum Yerushalmi, in the Targum is the Aramaic translation of the Torah, it says on the Eitz HaDas that it is Ilan Daita, a tree of knowledge, that whoever eats from it can differentiate between good and bad. And if that's the case, says the Rebbe, what was so terrible about the Chet Eitz HaDas? That not only did Adam bring punishment for himself, but he brought the death, the whole idea of death, for him and his children and all generations until Mashiach comes. And since all it is a tree where you eat from it, you can differentiate between good and bad, says the Rebbe, not only is that not something negative, but that is part of our avodah. Our avodah needs to be, that's our whole avodah, to differentiate between good and bad, what is asur and what is mutter. Why is it a negative thing to eat from it? And so the Rebbe concludes that we must say that the Eitz HaDas itself is not something negative. It is actually something positive. It is totally Kedusha. But there's a level of Kedusha where, although it is Kedusha, somewhere down the line, it can lead to something negative. And this is really going to be the focus of the whole maamer, that you can have Kedusha, you can, so to speak, be doing the right thing, but you can do it in a way that could lead to something negative. And that's what we're going to discuss a lot in the maamer. And the Rebbe points out that based on this, we can understand what the Eitz HaDas was doing in Gan Eden. Because if the Eitz HaDas is something negative, it can't be in Gan Eden. Gan Eden cannot withstand things that are negative, which is why when Adam Rishon did sin, Vayigarshas Adam, he was immediately chased out from Gan Eden. And Gan Eden was also the place where we get the reward for our Torah and mitzvahs in this world, which means Gan Eden is something that is totally positive. And if so, how could it be that the Eitz HaDas is there if it is negative? So the Rebbe again reiterates that there's a level, the Eitz HaDas is a level of Kedusha. There's a level of Kedusha that although it is Kedusha, but somewhere along the line, beribo yishtashalus, it can lead to things that are positive. And that's what we'll understand in the rest of the maamer, how we can have Kedusha that leads to something negative, and what we can do to make sure that the Kedusha remains only in the realm of positivity. So to be able to understand how do we have something that is positive but can end up being negative, the Rebbe says we have to understand Bechlal, in our avodah, in our service to Hashem, there are two ways of doing avodah. One way of doing avodah is b'medidah v'hagbala, is limited, and there's another way where we can serve Hashem in an unlimited way. And these two ways of serving Hashem, limited and unlimited, are both in our service itself, They're also in the preparation, in the midos, and the hisboinenus, the contemplation that leads to service, and also, if we get a chance to get into it, into the spiritual levels, into the spheros above. And to explain this, the Rebbe goes, let's get into avodah. Avodah is hayoim la'asosim, it's our service in this world, which in general is divided into three categories: Torah, avodah, and gemilus chasadim, learning Torah, davening, and acts of kindness. And the Rebbe says that in each one of these, there is a way that they're done in a very limited way. So, for example, when it comes to gemilus chasadim, that although stuck in general is the idea of having mercy, nevertheless, it's possible that Al pi Torah, one's tzedakah will be limited, and will be not only limited, but so limited that he actually only thinks about himself. The Torah says, "Efes ki lo yeh becha evyoin," there shall not be poor amongst you. Our rabbis focus on the word, what does it mean amongst you? You yourself. That the tzedakah giver shall not be poor. And from here our rabbis learn that if it's a matter of you or someone else, and then actually you come first. Right. So there's a way where even al pi Torah, although you're giving tzedakah in theory, but you're actually thinking first about yourself. And the Rebbe says, although maybe al pi Torah that could be okay, but that sort of limited avodah, the Rebbe says, leads to a different Mishnah where it says, one who makes himself poor, at the end will become poor. When you treat yourself as poor and you don't think about others, you'll end up truly being poor. Similarly, when it comes to davening, although davening is our connection to Hashem, but davening has limitations. Davening has set times. Davening has a set text. And if one views davening in a very limited way, as these are the words I need to say, this is the times I need to do it, he's tfilos chakeva, he makes his davening like almost like a burden, then that sort of davening, although he may tick the boxes and have said all the words and done it in the right time even, but it's not the type of davening which will be accepted up above. It's more like a burden which he's trying to get rid of. And similarly when it comes to Torah, that although the mitzvah of Torah is a constant mitzvah, that has no set time, we have to learn Torah day and night, but a person can find heterim even from halacha, that one who has limited time only studies Torah a little bit in the morning, a little bit at night, to the extent that a person who's really time poor can be yotzei his mitzvah of learning Torah with saying Shema in the morning and Shema at night. Right? So although al pi Torah there's a limitation here, nonetheless, our rabbis learn that if you do have more time than that, one who has time to study Torah and doesn't study Torah, dvar havaya baza, he's disgracing the word of Hashem. So what we see is that we have a limited avodah, which maybe al pi Torah is limited, but can lead to negative things. Similarly, the Rebbe says it is in our midas also, in the love and fear that we have for Hashem, they can also be limited. That our love for Hashem can be limited in our feelings of self. Meaning to say, when you love Kedusha, you love Torah, you love mitzvahs, rather than loving them because they are essentially good, you love them because you feel they're good for you. Which means you really are the center of that love. It's based on you. And if it's based on you and how you feel it's good and how you enjoy davening or you enjoy learning or you enjoy giving tzedakah, what can end up happening is later down the line, you enjoy other things as well. And those things may not be so positive. And similarly, when it comes to yira, when it comes to fear, although fear is normally more bittul, it's less about yourself. But nonetheless, you can have a fear, rather than the fear of doing something negative that will upset Hashem, the fear could be, what will be my retribution? What will be my punishment for doing those things? Right? So again, you become the center of your fear, even though it's a fear of doing the wrong thing, but you're not afraid of the wrong thing itself, you're afraid of the consequence. And based on that, if you're the center of it, there could be other negative things, you could be afraid of other things that you're not supposed to be afraid of. Meaning to say, the Rebbe says, you can even daven and feel real love and real fear for Hashem, but after davening, that love and fear instead invests itself into negative things. So again, we have an idea of Kedusha, but if it's limited, negativity could come out of it. The Rebbe goes on that similarly, when it comes to contemplation that brings about these emotions, there's also a way where your contemplation can be limited. Because your hisbonenus, your contemplation, first of all, if it's contemplation of Hashem, your hisbonenus, your understanding of Hashem could be limited to the level of godliness which relates to the world. to the level of godliness which is enclosed in the world, the way Hashem gives life to the world and not beyond. Similarly, the way you contemplate as well, there's a person could contemplate using only his human intellect, only logic, and only rationalizing everything. And the problem is when you do that, although you could be contemplating about something holy, something kedusha, Torah, and mitzvahs, an idea in Chassidus, but if A, you're only contemplating it in relative to yourself, and B, only using your human intellect, and you don't mix in this idea that Hashem is beyond what you can understand, and that there's more out there than you can end up having, possibly a negative conclusion. Because the same way logically you understand something, but it's based on logic, there could be a logical argument countering that's even stronger, that you don't have an answer to. And as long as you're only using your logic, then it's possible someone could disprove you, and then your conclusion could end up being something negative because you have no arguments. I mean, it's really, really important that whenever we, think about Torah, mitzvahs, whatever it is, we have to realize to always mix in, to always recognize that there's an Eibishter beyond the world. Right, the idea that although we have to make a kli when it comes to parnasa, when it comes to health, you have to go see a doctor, but rationalizing it too much, where everything is dependent on what the doctor says or what the keli is also wrong, because you have to mix in the fact that the Eibishter runs the world, that the Eibishter is beyond nature, and if you forget that, and even though you're thinking about things in a sort of Torah kind of perspective, but you forget that there's an Eibishter there beyond, you could come to negative conclusions. The Rebbe goes on, similarly, there's a level of avodah even beyond seichel called re'usa deliba, desire of the heart. This is a connection, a love, which is beyond rationalization, which is super rational. But even then the Rebbe says it's possible that it could be limited. And the Rebbe gives an example. Re'usa deliba could be compared to the love, a very strong love between two people. That it's a ava she'ena tluya b'davar, a love that is not dependent on anything, and therefore it's a really powerful love beyond logic. Nonetheless, it's possible that love itself could come in two different ways. One way is that sometimes it's revealed, but that means sometimes it can also be concealed. And when it's concealed, you need something to bring it back. What brings it back? There's a certain hisboneness, a certain contemplation. You think about the love itself, and that could also arouse it. But it still needs something to arouse it. The Rebbe says there's another type of rusa deliba, there's another connection between two people, which is super rational, but it's essential. That's like the love between a parent and a child, where you don't have to arouse that love, you don't have to think about it, but it's part of your essence. And so the Rebbe says, so too when it comes to our connection to Hashem, even if a person reaches a level of re'usa deliba, it's possible it could be in a limited way, that it can be sometimes hidden, and you have to reveal it. Now the second you have to reveal it, that means you're mixing yourself in there. And once there's another mitzias in there, and once there's a mitzias in there, the Rebbe says that every mitzias has a mevukash. If you're a mitzias, you're seeking out something. You may be seeking out to be totally connected to Hashem, to be totally batal to Hashem, but you're still seeking something. And the second you're seeking something, the second your mitzias is mixed in there, then it's possible that there could be something negative. Now, this is a very, very fine level. This is a very, very high level. But the nikud is the same nikud the whole way through. You could have something that is totally within kedusha, but if you're limiting it to yourself, to a mitzias, then there could be negative things. And therefore, the Rebbe says you have to reach a level where it's essence. This is really, I think, in these lines, it's the nikud of the Maimer, is that what Chassidus is demanding of us is that our connection to Hashem is not just something that we work on. It's not just something that we think about, but it has to become who we are, our essence. Not us trying to get something, but it needs to be our whole being. And this is really the nikud of the Maimer. Only then can we be sure that we're in a level of kedusha which can't have negative consequences. The Rebbe now goes on, and he shows that you can have this limited avodah. Where does it come from? It actually comes from its origins in the spheres above, in the spiritual levels. So the Rebbe starts with the level of Malchus. Now, Malchus, which is the last of the 10 spheres, The Malchus itself is made up of 10 levels within it, and the lower 9 levels of Malchus, they are what descended down from the world of Atzilus into the worlds below, Bria, Yetzira, Asiya, to be able to give them life and to be able to make their existence. And therefore, says the Rebbe, being that Malchus goes into the lower worlds, in worlds that already have a bit of negativity, then it's certain that Malchus itself, we cannot say is completely, has nothing negative there, but clearly it gives life already to something negative. So we see a level of Kedusha giving room for negativity. The Rebbe says if you go a little bit higher, above Malchus are the Midas, are the emotions, and although the emotions are mostly Chesed, and Chesed again is only positive, nonetheless, says the Rebbe, there's different types of Midas. When the Midas, there's Chesed which is called Megula and Chesed Mechusa. There's a revealed Chesed and there's a concealed Chesed. Where is it concealed? So it's concealed. You can have the emotions which are still concealed and they are still within the intellect. It says in Mishlei, Lo yachpot ksil bitfunakim biskalis liboy, that the fool does not desire tevuna, does not desire, we'll see what tevuna is in a second, rather kim bihisgalus liboy, rather the openness of the heart. And Chassidus explains there's a difference between bina and tevuna. Bina is understanding, but tevuna, which is the same shoresh, if you break down the word tevuna, it has the letters ben ubas. Ben ubas, son and daughter, are the derivatives, they're the products of your contemplation. They're ava and yira. But they're love and fear. But there's love and fear when it's open in the heart. And then you have a level of love and fear where it's called tevuna. It's not called midas because that love and fear is still included within the mind. It's not intellect, it's emotions, but those emotions are still within the mind. And says the Rebbe, on that level, when the emotions are in the mind and they're still connected to the intellect, then they won't lead to anything negative. Those emotions sort of stay in check because the mind is always controlling them and making sure that they are okay. But once those emotions come down into the heart, then once you become really emotional, then it's possible that those emotions can lead to something negative. You get really excited about something, but that could go in the wrong way, or you get really upset about something that you're supposed to get upset about according to Torah, but it could also go in the negative way. So the midas still have a potential for negativity. Going one step up, the Rebbe goes into intellect. You have chachma and bina, and the Rebbe says on the level of bina, although you can also have some negativity, and as we know that the concept of shviras hakelim that took place before the makeup of our world happened on the level of Bina. So Bina also, there was a breakage and there was the room and potential for something negative. And the Rebbe takes this even higher up, even on the level of Keser. We know Keser has two aspects. There's what's called the inner dimension of Keser and the outer dimension of Keser. And the Rebbe says on the outer dimension of Keser, there's also a concept that the chitzonim, the negative forces, are able to draw life from chitzonius hakeser. Similarly, the Rebbe in brackets goes even higher, that even on the level before the Tzimtzum, where Hashem's light filled everything, right? Even in that light, you could break that light down to light which is sort of included within Hashem, and light which is already able and set aside to be revealed to the world. And that light also, the second it's already set aside and relates to the world, says the Rebbe, even on the highest levels, has potential for a world, and therefore potential for negativity. And so this is really the source. The Rebbe is bringing us the source. This is part of creation, that the part of creation is that even things in Kedusha have the ability to allow for negative things, and it's only when you reach Pnimius HaKeser, the inner will, the deepest dimension, on that level which is totally beyond relating to the world, on that level there's no ability for anything negative. And again, this is the point of the Maimer, that really ultimately our job, what we're trying to do is reach this level, this deep Pnimius, the very essence of our neshama, that on that level our Torah, our mitzvahs, our connection to Hashem is pure. Based on everything until now, the Rebbe says we can understand that our avodah needs to be in a way that is unlimited. Because once you have a limited avodah, there's a potential for a negative consequence. There's a potential down the line that it could lead to something negative. And to make sure that our avodah always remains pure and doesn't allow for anything negative, it needs to be unlimited. The Rebbe gives an example. This is where we find what we call kulei Beis Shammai, that even though Beis Shammai normally was gvura, was very limited, was betzimtzum, nevertheless they also had certain areas where they were actually the makel ones. Because even in their sort of limited avodah, you have to connect it to something beyond yourself. And the Rebbe goes back to those same examples we had near the beginning of the Maimer, of Torah, avodah, gemilas chasadim being in a limited way. And the Rebbe says what it means is not that your Torah and mitzvahs should completely be unlimited, like a total shviras hakelim, but it's more like the concept of oiris detoyu bekelim detikun. You connect your limited avodah to something, you mix in something unlimited a little bit. So, for example, when it comes to the gemilas chasadim, when it comes to giving tzedakah, although there is limitations that the Torah gives, nevertheless, the Alter Rebbe writes that if you're giving tzedakah because you're giving tzedakah for your own neshama, then when it comes to saving your own neshama, there's no limits. A person gives whatever he can to be able to save his own self. And there's no limits whatsoever. So if the idea of your helping others is not just because you have a mitzvah you have to do, and if so, sometimes I come first. But the idea of tzedakah is because it's noigeya benefesh, it's important to me, this is something that is really touches my soul, then you don't have those same limitations. You won't put yourself first. Similarly, when it comes to davening, that if the davening is not just you see it as something you have to do, and although you're going to do it properly with all the details, but it's something that matters to your very being, then again, your davening is going to be in an unlimited way. The words are still going to be limited, but the way you're going to do it is going to be in an unlimited sense. Similarly, when it comes to learning Torah, if a person learns Torah not just because it's an obligation, but a person recognizes the value of Torah, that the Torah is the Samachayim. Hashem gave us the Torah in order to give us the strength to overcome all of the challenges that we have with our Yetzer Hara. Then again, when it's something that's noigeya to your soul, when it really matters to you, then the Torah is going to be in an unlimited way. You're going to find the time to be able to learn more and more. And similarly, when it comes to the emotions, that although we said the love and fear could be limited to oneself, and what is good for him, or the consequences which he's afraid of if he doesn't do the right thing, that's very limited. And the point is that one is supposed to instead have a love and fear that you love Hashem and you love Kedusha, not because it's good for you, because you recognize it's essentially good. And the Rebbe adds that even if you're holding right now on a level where you don't feel that this is essentially good, you're still holding on the level that you're doing things because you feel that you gain from it, it's good for you. The Rebbe says just having it in your conscious, just recognizing, even though you don't feel it, that Torah, mitzvahs, Kedusha, Hashem are essentially good, that is already enough to make sure that that love and that fear don't stray off to other things. Why? Because the second you realize, even though you don't necessarily feel it, that Hashem, Torah, and mitzvahs are the only things that are essentially good, you're not going to come to loving other things which are negative, because you realize that all the other things, they might be good for you, but they're not essentially good. They're only good for you. And so as long as you keep in mind that Torah and mitzvahs are the only thing that are essentially good, you don't feel it, but you think about it, that will keep you in check. And similarly, when it comes to thinking, when it comes to intellect, says the Rebbe that whenever you contemplate Hashem, Torah, mitzvahs, when you're thinking about something, always have to connect it to something that is a little bit beyond your intellect. What we call the level of chachma, re'iyas chachma, when you see something, right? It's called re'iyah because when you see something, no logical arguments can convince you that you didn't see it. When you hear something, when you think about something, someone can argue with you and prove you wrong. But when you saw something, no matter what anybody else says, you're not going to change your mind because you saw it with your own eyes. And similarly, this is the idea of chachma that we always have to, in whatever we're thinking about, recognize that there's a Hashem beyond creation. There's a Hashem beyond the world, and there are things we can't understand, and so we use our seichel as much as we can, but we have to have room to open up for something beyond seichel. And similarly, in that re'usa de liba, that great love, which is beyond our intellect, even on that level, says the Rebbe, we have to reach that level of etzem. We have to reach that level of a deep love that doesn't need to be re-aroused all the time, but that we have to reach that level where it comes from the etzem like a parent to a child, that on such a level then there's no negativity. So this is really the point of the Maimer, that whatever level we are, wherever we're serving Hashem, we have to be open to recognize that Torah, that mitzvahs, that Hashem is the ultimate good, not because it's just good for us, because it is real good. And we have to always recognize that Hashem is in charge, that whatever we think we understand, and we're supposed to use our mind, and we're supposed to speak to a doctor or get the advice of a friend before we do things. And this is the way the Rebbe wants us to do it, but having in mind constantly that ultimately there's a Hashem in the world, and that we have to trust Him, even when we make those calculations. Based on all this, the Rebbe says we can now go back and understand what the Eitz Hadas was. What was the sin of eating the Eitz Hadas? Because seemingly differentiating between bad and good is a positive thing. It's a level in Kedusha. However, says the Rebbe, the Eitz Hadas is a limited level of Kedusha. And therefore, although it is positive and it is Gan Eden, but once you eat from it, it's possible there could be negative things down the line. And therefore, what is the advice? How do we deal with this? Says the Rebbe, you have to come to first the Eitz HaChaim. The Eitz HaChaim, the tree of life, represents something that has no negativity whatsoever. Eitz Hadas has toiv v'ra, but Eitz HaChaim is only toiv. There's only good. It's unlimited. And once you first have a little bit of that Eitz HaChaim, you go beyond yourself to go out of your limits, then you're able to go back down into the limited world, and your service is different. And in fact, the Rebbe says that was the ultimate intention of Hashem, that first they should eat from the Eitz HaChaim, and then they could partake from the Eitz Hadas. Meaning to say that the avodah is in the Eitz Hadas. The avodah is to come into a limited world, and work within that limited world. But if you're only working within the limited world, and you're only working within your limited self, then it's possible there could be something negative, and therefore you have to connect to something higher. The Rebbe says this is what we do every day. We start the day with Moida Ani. Moida Ani is that bittul, is that giving yourself over to something beyond yourself. Once you start with that Moida Ani, once you give yourself over, then you can begin the rest of the day. And this is what it means that the Bnei Yisrael were in the desert and they found someone gathering wood on Shabbos, that there's two perushim. The perush of the Zohar is that he was comparing the Eitz HaChaim and Eitz Hadas to see which one was greater. And the commentaries explain that his conclusion was that the Eitz Hadas was greater. The tree of knowledge, that limited tree. How is that greater? Because that's the purpose of our whole avodah. The purpose of the avodah is to come down into the limited world, is to be able to differentiate between good and bad, is to be able to work within the world. However, if you just compare the two, and by comparing in contrast, you separate the two, you separate the Eitz Hadas from the Eitz HaChaim, you have that limited service of Hashem without mixing in something beyond yourself, then what will ultimately happen is it could lead to something negative, and something so negative that it could even lead down the line practically to the simple perush of the pasuk, that there could be someone who's mechalel Shabbos. So although you started on a level of kedusha, but chas v'shalom, not that if you're not, that we're going to reach this level of breaking Shabbos, but the nekuda is, this is where it could go. Because if things beyond nature are not your view, are not at least in your perspective, everything is very limited to yourself, then it can lead to negative conclusions even within the service of Hashem. And this is then the point of the Maimer, is that the point of the Maimer is that we have to serve Hashem, and we have to Torah and mitzvahs, gemilas chasadim, davening, but we have to make sure that that we are not the center of our service to Hashem, but Hashem is the center of that service. And more than just that, but recognizing that giving ourselves over to that level of Hashem beyond just what Hashem does within this world, beyond just what Hashem does for us, but to something much greater, and really reaching down actually inside of us, inside our own etzem. And this is how the Rebbe ends off the Maimer, that this is the avodah beyond Hagbala, the avodah beyond limit, from the etzem and neshama, which is chavuka udvuka bach, which is totally connected and cleaving to Hashem. And this is done through, ultimately, kabbalas ol, toyenes ulach, that it accepts upon itself your yoke, and then we reach the level of yechida leyachadach, to totally unite with Hashem, which these three are from the hoshainis that we say, the chavuka dvucha, the ches, the toenes ulach, and yechida leyachadach. But again, this is also something that you saw a lot in the Rebbe's Torah, that ultimately the kabbalas ol is just accepting the yoke of Hashem, but in an unlimited way, reaches to really the highest levels. And this is sort of the Mesiras Nefesh, which is our generation, to do our avodah, to almost put ourselves on the side, to open up to Hashem beyond what we can recognize, beyond what we can imagine, to allow that to come into the way we think and into the way we feel. That Torah and mitzvahs should be all about Hashem, and this is the way to be able to then go back into the world and do things right the way Hashem wants, and being confident that we're going to stay on the right path, reach the right conclusions, and ultimately get to the ultimate destination, which is the bringing of Mashiach speedily in our days.